In the name of the Father, of the Son, of the Holy Spirit. Amen. A student who was training for ordination to the ministry of the Church was allowed to preach his first sermon, tucked away in an Oxfordshire countryside. His misfortune was that this was to be on Trinity Sunday. So the student thought about the language we use. Father, Son and Holy Spirit, three persons in one God. What inadequate words to describe the majesty of God, thought the student. God's far too big to be contained in such tiny, nitpicking phrases like that. God's bigger than the universe he created, so no doctrine formed out of mere words can even begin to describe the nature of God. The student seized his pen and began to write his sermon notes. God has no more resemblance to a doctrine of the Trinity, he wrote, than a hilly landscape has to a road map. He completed his notes and set off to find the church where he was going to preach. Unfortunately, the student arrived after the service had begun, having got thoroughly lost while looking for the church, because he had not got a road map. Friends, however inadequate the road map may be in describing the full reality, all of us need a road map. However insufficient the doctrine of the Trinity may be at describing the majesty of God, we require that form of words, as without them all of us could easily lose our way when we try to talk about God. At present, there's a real need to talk about God. There's a need to talk about God's great love, to talk about God's unlimited forgiveness, and to talk about the gift of abundant life that God offers to all who desire it. There is already enough misery, worries and sadness out there in the world. Each week, we tune into the news to discover the latest numbers of lives that the COVID-19 virus has claimed. Each week we're left to wonder what's going to happen next. Each week we're reminded that our current situation is not yet over. There's a lot of uncertainty in our world. There's a need for security. And I believe that the best protection on offer, the best security on offer, is our God. When Jesus gave his Great Commission to his disciples in our Gospel, he was aware that what he was asking was going to be difficult. Jesus had suffered and had died doing the same work. He knew that this same fate awaited some of them. He knew what he was asking of his disciples was not straightforward. He knew that there were many challenges and difficulties which lay ahead. They were all going to be stretched to do what he asked. But when times became hard, he promised that he would be there right beside them to help them. And this promise he made to them all those years ago is his promise to all of us here today. In our Gospel, Jesus gave his disciples a threefold commission on how they were going to make disciples of all nations. 1, they were to go. 2, they were to baptize. And 3, they were going to need to teach the gospel. These 3 things were required of Jesus, asked of his disciples from Jesus. And the challenge we have in our present circumstances is it's not easy or it's impossible to do what Jesus asks. It's not easy for any of us to go anywhere at this time, and we can get in trouble if we do so. We cannot at the moment baptize people in our church, as the church building is closed. And finally, it's challenging to teach others about the gospel when we're supposed to avoid strangers and to keep ourselves to ourselves for ours and other people's safety. So how do we fulfill what Jesus asks? How do we get on with the work he wants us to do? And I think in these circumstances, we need to each hold on to the words of Jesus' commission, to take heart from the last words he utters. These are the words that Jesus is with us, and he will be with us to the very end of the age. I think from these words we should take heart that Jesus knows our circumstances. He is aware of the world we live in. He is conscious of the struggles that we've gone through. He knows about the discomforts which we have suffered. He appreciates all the freedoms we've relinquished voluntarily and for all the right reasons for why we've abandoned them. Jesus is aware of all what is happening. Even though we might not be aware of this, he is still, even under these circumstances, working his purpose out. For proof of this, just look at the number of views churches have had on their sites, like YouTube, and the number of people that the church is reaching via video platforms like Zoom. Friends, it's apparent that our amateur and our small efforts are reaping great rewards, and as such will have to continue in some form or other when we return to whatever normal will be in the future. Today is Trinity Sunday. Traditionally, this is a Sunday where some clergy, if they have a licensed reader, preacher or curate, ask them to do the sermon. The reason they do so is it's not easy explaining the Trinity. There have been some large and baffling books written on the subject. Equally, there have been just as many baffling illustrations and sermons preached too. But not one of them fully explains what the Trinity is. It remains, and it will remain, a mystery. But the fact that the Trinity remains a mystery is not a bad thing. I think a little bit of magic in life is exciting, and as Christians we must never ever forget how exciting and how unpredictable our God actually is. In the C.S. Lewis Chronicles of Narnia, in the story of The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, there's a bit I enjoy where the children who are about to meet Aslan and discover that this Aslan's a lion, they question the beavers on whether he is safe, to which they get the reply, "Safe," said Mr. Beaver. "Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe. But he's good. He's the king, I tell you." Our God is not safe, but our God is good. And this good God will get us through this as he determines he will. There's also a famous picture I'd like to reference in my sermon this week. It's a famous and a well-known picture painted by the Russian painter Andrei Rublev in the 15th century. And if all has gone to plan, there should be a link to this picture on this sermon. Hopefully many of you will know the picture anyhow. And those of you who can, please access this picture. And when you do, you will see that it's painted in a way to leave a space for the viewer to be there with the Trinity in their table fellowship. They are sitting around a table, and as we look at that picture, we are there sitting at that table with them. And that it's been painted in this way is deliberate. It's there to remind us all that the invitation to be in communion with God is always open. And to enter into this communion, all we need to do is to want it and to show up. And yes, in this space with God, we may not always be safe. We may be surprised. We may be challenged. We may be called upon to do what we deem impossible. But at this time, in this space, all of us are welcome. All of us will be supported. And all of us will be loved. This promise was made long ago to us by God. He promised that God, the Holy Trinity, would be with us, that he wants to be with us. He wants to enjoy fellowship with us, just as much as we want to enjoy short table fellowship with him. Jesus promised us this. He promised us that we could be with God. He promised us that through him we are with God. I want you to hold on to that this time, this Trinity Sunday. Don't get baffled by the imagery of the Trinity, but instead remember the great love that God has for each and every one of us.